Hello, I'm Howard Weiss, and joining me today is Eugene Silberstein. On behalf of HVAC Excellence, we appreciate you joining us to learn about improving student outcomes. Regardless of whether you're teaching at a school, manufacturer, supply house, or training your own employees, we all seek to be the best instructors possible and help prepare our students for success. However, data shows there's room for improvement. One study by utility companies shows 72% of residential systems are oversized, 68% are improperly charged, 70% have inadequate airflow, and 91% of systems have been untested for combustion efficiency. Today, we're going to discuss how to use data from student outcome assessments and different certifications to help you improve your student outcomes. Joining me now is Eugene Silberstein.
Thanks, Howard. As Howard mentioned, our goal as educators is to effectively prepare our students for success in the HVACR industry. But how do we define success? Howard threw some statistics out there, and I'm going to hit you with some more. Out in the field, we replace parts, and those parts go back to the manufacturers where they bench test them to see what went wrong with the parts. Well, if you look at the screen, you're going to see that 82.1% of residential components that went back to the factory for testing were marked as NFF, no fault found. That number gets a little bit better with light commercial. You're talking about 67.9% of components with no fault. Industrial drops to 28.6%, and chillers 10.7%. Well, what does that say? Obviously, the numbers are a lot better when you get into larger equipment that requires more extensive and intensive training. But again, it all boils down to how do we define success. Some other numbers. No fault was found in 30% of compressors that came back, 40 to 50% of motors that came back. Almost a third of commercial controls that went back to the manufacturer were marked as no fault found. So success is an ambiguous term, but the good news is there are some tools that we can use in our training programs to help us improve the quality of the students who go through our training program. So over the next 15 or 20 minutes, Howard and I will be showing you how some of these tools work and how we can put them to use to help improve the quality of our students. At HVAC Excellence, it's our mission to improve the technical competency of our industry. And using the data collected from our portable and stackable credentials as input to our uniquely designed in-house software, we can accurately identify competency and task-related strengths and weaknesses. These strengths and weaknesses might be those of an individual student or of a group of students. The great news is that the data captured can reflect a specific point in time or over longer periods as people advance through the various stages of their careers. Collectively, this vast array of information is known as longitudinal data. And although you may not know it, you are very likely already aware of similar data collection processes. In most states, for example, grade school children periodically take standardized tests in math and English. The results of these exams are tabulated and evaluated, and the benefits of collecting this information is immeasurable. It helps identify skills gaps, instructor strengths and deficiencies, curriculum strengths and weaknesses, and other rudiments on which the effectiveness of the educational process is evaluated. The overall goal of processes such as this is to improve the results-oriented needle and move it in the direction of improved student outcomes.
Similarly to what Eugene was saying, throughout each stage of a person's career in the HVAC industry, they take progressive levels of certification or portable and stackable credentials. They do so to see if they have the retained knowledge in a specific discipline or if they need additional training. This journey may begin with someone taking a student outcome assessment, such as our heat exam at a high school. Someone moves on to the post-secondary level, community college, trade school apprenticeship program. They're taking an entry-level certification such as employment ready, taking specialty test. Person moves up and has a couple years of documented field experience. They may challenge themselves to take discipline-specific technician certifications, written or hands-on. However, when a person transitions from the field into the classroom, they need to have a much deeper understanding of the physics, the theories behind it, than someone in the field. As they do, they take these specialized credentialing exams. This section is just to give you a little idea of the data we're going to analyze and show you how you can use these different exams, the progressive levels, to help improve student outcomes.
As previously stated, HVAC Excellence offers progressive levels of certification. And while the specific questions on student level, technician level, and instructor level examinations are different from each other, the competency areas covered at all three levels are the same. In comparing test results of instructors and their students, for example, the subject area questions that are missed are, for the most part, similar for both the teacher and the student. This clearly indicates that the instructor strengths directly translate into student strengths, and instructor weaknesses translate into student weaknesses. So, although HVAC Excellence offers over 70 different exams, for our purposes today, we're going to focus on a few examples to show you how we can compare student and instructor outcomes. You have a slide in front of you, and this represents aggregate data for our electrical exams at the student level and the instructor exams. So for the most part, you're going to see that the student performance mirrors the instructor performance. So electrical components, 71% correct for students, 73% for instructors. And that's pretty much consistent. So there are similarities between student and instructor performance. Well, there are instances where students outperform their instructors. Like, for example, if you look at electrical safety, the electrical students here scored a 94% of their questions correct, whereas the instructor, 76%. Well, that's a really good idea, and that's a really good example of sometimes where we get a do as I say, not as I do mentality, where a lot of our instructors came from the field. And we're teaching our students safety, but some of the items that we're teaching are not items that we actually embraced as we were in the field. So you're going to see some really neat examples of where student performance actually exceeded that of the instructors. So if we take a look at the last two items on this slide, and that's the fundamentals of motors and capacitors, we can see that the instructors performed in the mid-80s, whereas the students performed in the mid-70s. And the similar example with the interpreting electrical diagrams. Students in the mid-70s, where instructors in the low 80s. And trends such as this help us identify potential delivery problems with the instructor. The instructor knows the fundamentals of motors and capacitors, but may have some difficulties teaching that concept to their students. Just as with interpreting electrical diagrams, our instructors know how to interpret electrical diagrams, but they might not necessarily be able to teach the concepts of interpreting electrical diagrams. Let's move on to the next slide, and let's take a look at air conditioning. Right. So on this exam, all right, again, pretty much a mirror between instructor performance and student performance. But even though the exam has a passing score of 70%, and the students are getting 74% on average, we can see that there are two areas, namely AC troubleshooting and refrigerant flow control theory and application, where the students might very well be underperforming? Well, one reason for that is if we take a look at the instructor side, we could see that the instructors on average are performing in the low to mid 70s in refrigerant flow control theory. So although the students are underperforming slightly, if we look at the performance of the instructor, we could see that there is a deficiency in instructor retained knowledge in those content areas. So in an instance like this, we might recommend that an instructor receive additional training in certain content areas. Keep in mind that the passing score on the instructor level exams is 80%. All right, so let's take a look at another example. Let's move on to heat pumps. All right, so here we see some heat pump comparison. And again, if we look at airflow, we see both the instructors and the students, they did really, really well. And again, that comparison between instructor and student, pretty much uniform. But if we look at heat pump cycle, all right, again, there we see students performing in the mid 70s where the instructors are performing in the mid 80s. Well, our instructors know the heat pump cycle, but because we have that deficiency, that discrepancy between the mid 80s for the instructor and the mid 70s for the student, that's an indication that we have a potential delivery problem. Similar to that, if we look at the troubleshooting and the schematic sections, all right, those are the last two on there. Again, we see instructors performing near 80%, but students performing near 70% on the troubleshooting. Again, that discrepancy indicates a potential delivery problem, and the same thing with schematics. One thing that's really, really interesting is if you look at the service, all right, the heat pump service, instructors are performing in the mid 70s where students are performing in the low 80s. And again, that's one of those kind of do as I say, not as I do type scenarios where teachers are teaching concepts that their students are learning, but the teachers might not necessarily have embraced them themselves when they were out in the field. All right, so we looked at heat pumps. Let's take a look at gas heating. All right, so if we take a look at the gas heat, for example, we can see that both instructors and students are having issues with combustion theory and heating fuels. If we looked at the student results by themselves, we would say, oh, well, the students are doing okay at 70% and passing is 70%, so they're pretty much in line with where they need to be. But if we take a look at the instructor performance, the instructors are also performing at a 70 or so % success rate with those questions. So this indicates that instructors might need some additional training in those specific areas. Well, students having problems with electrical troubleshooting. All right, in this example, you can see that students are getting about 59% of the questions right. Well, instructors are having some issues as well. All right, so again, in the safety issue, we can see that the students are outperforming the instructors. So again, keep in mind that when we're evaluating this, that the passing score on the instructor's exam is 80%. So when we see results where teachers are performing in the mid 60s, mid 70s, although those scores might be passing for a student, the level of expectations for an instructor are much higher. So we looked at heat pumps, we looked at gas heat. Let's take a look at oil heat. All right, and with our oil heat, again, combustion theory is an area where our students outperformed our instructors. And if you take a look at that, even though our students were performing at 63%, that's below passing. If we take a look at where our instructors are performing, they're typically getting about 31% of the questions correct. So imagine what would happen if we encouraged instructors to get professional development or improve their knowledge base in combustion theory. So even if they brought that up to 60, 70, 80%, imagine what would happen with the student results. So it's important that we look not only at the student results of these exams, but also the instructors. And once again, troubleshooting is a common area for student deficiencies. So additional instructor training may be warranted. Now, one thing, although the students are passing this exam, if you look at the totals at the very, very bottom, it says 72% correct. Instructors might look at that and say, oh, great, my students are passing. But in delving deeper into the results, we could see that although the passing score is 70, in the heating safety, the students are scoring below 70, installation and service below 70, troubleshooting below 70, combustion theory below 70. So there are specific areas that students are deficient in, even though the overall score is over 70. All right, finally, let's take a look at electric heat. And in the electric heat area, all seems to be in alignment. All right, all the planets seem to be in alignment with the exception of electric heating systems and components. By looking at the student performance, it can be seen that although students are passing the test, they're underperforming in that heating systems and component section. But it's not a surprise. Students are underperforming, but if you take a look, the teacher performance in that area is less than 50%. So this is a problem or a potential problem with the teacher's knowledge. Is it the student's knowledge? Is it a group of students? It is a problem with delivery instead of knowledge. So by looking at these charts and evaluating this data, we could see, okay, we see the students performing at 58% with heating systems and components. Oh, the students aren't learning the content. Well, is the reason the students aren't learning the content because the teachers don't know the content, or because the teachers aren't effectively delivering the content? So based on this, we could see that the teacher performance in the heating systems and components area is 47%. So it's not a delivery issue as much as it is a content retention or knowledge retention issue. So we can direct and we can concentrate an instructor's professional development based on, do they need more knowledge in a content area, or do they need training on effectively delivering the content?
As Eugene alluded to, we give multiple ways of pulling the same data. Many of you have given one of our student test entry-level certifications, and maybe you've seen the test scores of your students. Some of you may be familiar with the fact we have comparative analysis tools. In fact, we provide many ways of pulling the same data. Why? Well, looking at this exam real quickly, there's an electrical exam. I'm an instructor. I see my students got an 85%. Let's move on to the next topic. But if I take a little time, I could see electrical troubleshooting, 76%. Is that because one student struggled in that area? If so, I could go back and help them. What if it's a group of students and they all did poorly? Well, at that point, I'm going to ask myself, how did my previous group of students do, whether that was last quarter, last semester, or last week? If it's a trend, now I need to analyze, how am I presenting the material? Am I providing enough time? Or is it me that I'm struggling with understanding the material myself? We give you lots of ways of accessing the same data to help you pinpoint, is the problem with an individual, group of individuals, or something we need to look at deeper within ourselves. Having looked at a bunch of different instructor tests compared to student tests, I wanted to add a few more student tests that we go through. Looking on the right here first, system diagnostics and troubleshooting. Students got a 97% on recovery. I may see that and just say, let's move on. But if I look down this list real quickly, I could see that air conditioning equipment and tools is a 57%. Just because a student passed the test doesn't mean that they passed all parts of a test. Sometimes we want to do a little deeper analysis to find out where their strengths and weaknesses are to help them be more successful in the field. If I take a look at the one on the left here, basic refrigeration and charging procedures, similarly, I see 85, 85, 82, but then I see Special refrigeration system components at a 69%. Let's look at this next slide a little more. While most schools don't teach residential energy auditing, they should. Over half the states now require duct blasting and blower door tests. And if we take a quick look here, 64% on blower door test. So that means that nearly 40% of students aren't prepared to do what's required by state law in most states. So while the students are passing with the 78%, we could dive a little deeper into the numbers, find out why. Do I need to spend a little more time on this? Do I need to convey it a little differently? The whole goal is to improve student outcomes and help them be more successful. If you remember in the beginning, I talked about some of the problems facing the industry. Utilities talked about equipment that was improperly charged, had inadequate airflow, hadn't been tested for combustion efficiency. If you take a look here, airflow, students are getting a 74% nationally. Critical charging, 66%. You could see where the problems are from the utilities perspective. Psychrometrics, 61%. Psychrometrics is the study of air. Air conditioning technicians should know something about air. Equally important here, we take a look at combustion, 68%. All these, other than airflow, are failing grades. Combustion efficiency is not just simply about maximizing the energy efficiency of the equipment. It's about making certain we don't have a byproduct called carbon monoxide. Having looked at a number of these, as Eugene mentioned earlier, we have over 70 exams. We could spend hours analyzing different tests. Our goal was to try and show you that there's a lot of different data, and there's a lot of ways of looking at this data to help you understand where the problem may lie and how to improve it. But we want to begin with also making certain you understand what the tools are you need for success. Too many of us, when we start, are basically handed a set of keys and told, go teach HVAC. We're told, make certain your program covers the competencies required by industry without knowing what those are. Thankfully, you don't have to put this together. Our team at HVAC Excellence spent several years using subject matter experts from different parts of the industry, representing different geographic regions, who assembled this data for you.
These extensive meetings and efforts resulted in the creation of what we call a job and task analysis document. And this document provides details on all of the individual jobs that field service personnel do in our industry. Each job is then broken down into a list of tasks and competencies that entry-level technicians should have mastery of. And while it took us years to create this map, it is available to the HVACR industry free of charge. And all you have to do to access it is visit www.escogroup.org. And this is a free resource, as I mentioned, and it provides a list of the basic competencies that should be incorporated into most HVACR educational programs to help equip students with the knowledge and skills that they're going to need for employment. And to further simplify the use of our competency and task list, most leading publishers have crosswalked their textbooks to validate that they cover these tasks and competencies. And, proper training consists of teaching a set of skills and our competencies for the various tasks that a student or technician is required to perform. Most programs try to teach these skills and competencies, but without properly assessing an instructor's mastery of these skills, an instructor can't possibly know if they're teaching at the level that is required for their students to succeed in the field. To improve student outcomes, we must take the time to not only access, but also put to use all of the data that's available to us. And this process doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But the first step is to verify that instructors have mastery of the content being taught. And once the content is mastered, as well as the delivery of the content is mastered, then your students will be well positioned to become masters themselves.
This may be overwhelming, the amount of data we have. We have, as I've stated before, over 70 industry certifications. We have our own unique in-house software program that helps us analyze where the strengths and weaknesses are and look for different trends. Please be assured that we're here to walk you through how to access and utilize this data. When you know how to master the data, you can help improve the student outcomes and help your students be more successful, which is the end goal of this session. We really hope you've enjoyed the little bit of time we've spent with you, and we'd like to thank you for doing so.